What if the entire case of Nancy Guthrie comes down to a single strand of DNA? One hair. One microscopic clue that investigators believe could finally expose whoever entered her Tucson home the night she vanished. And now, 100 days after her suspected abduction, the investigation is entering its most critical phase yet. Authorities publicly claim there's nothing new in the case, but behind the scenes, federal investigators are reportedly carrying out advanced DNA testing that could completely change everything. According to reports, the FBI is continuing extensive forensic analysis on biological evidence recovered from Nancy Guthrie's home, hoping it could identify a suspect through cutting-edge genetic technology. The case took another dramatic turn after FBI Director Kash Patel revealed new details during an interview on Sean Hannity's podcast. Patel said the FBI was initially kept out of the investigation for several days, a delay he suggested may have cost valuable time during the most important stage of the case. He explained that once federal agents were finally allowed in, they immediately began reviewing digital evidence, including Ring doorbell footage and cached Google data that investigators reportedly recovered even without a cloud subscription attached to the account. That effort eventually led to the release of the now widely discussed image connected to the investigation. But the biggest focus right now appears to be the DNA evidence. Speaking on the case, Nancy Grace claimed the biological sample could be undergoing highly advanced forensic testing capable of generating a full genetic profile from an incredibly tiny amount of material. According to her, this process could potentially identify someone even if investigators only recovered a single hair. And where that evidence was found could matter just as much as the DNA itself. If the strand was discovered in a common area of the house, investigators may not see it as especially significant. But if it was recovered from Nancy Guthrie's bedroom, the location where family members believe she may have been forcibly taken, the implications become far more serious. In that scenario, prosecutors could argue the evidence directly connects an unknown individual to the alleged abduction site. Grace also pushed back strongly against online speculation targeting Nancy Guthrie's family, insisting investigators are focused on what officials previously described as stranger DNA recovered from inside the home. Another major controversy surrounding the investigation involves tension between local authorities and federal agencies. Critics have questioned why certain DNA evidence reportedly remained at a private Florida lab for weeks before being transferred for additional testing. According to Grace, valuable time may have been lost during that process. She also described reports of disagreements between local officials and federal investigators over access to information, fueling speculation about a growing turf battle behind the scenes. While none of those disputes have been officially confirmed in detail, the friction has become a major talking point surrounding the case. Even so, investigators still appear confident that the enormous amount of evidence collected could eventually lead to answers. Authorities are reportedly working through thousands of hours of surveillance footage, license plate reader data, digital tracking information, fingerprints, fibers, and forensic evidence gathered throughout the investigation. Experts say cases like this are rarely solved through one dramatic breakthrough. Instead, they're usually built piece by piece through months of painstaking analysis. And after 100 days, that's exactly where this investigation now stands. No arrest, no public suspect, no confirmed motive, just a growing mountain of evidence. And the possibility that one tiny strand of DNA could ultimately reveal the truth about what happened to Nancy Guthrie. The deeper this investigation goes, the more disturbing the unanswered questions become. Because after 100 days, investigators still cannot explain one critical detail. How does someone vanish from their own home without leaving behind a clear trail? That question continues to haunt everyone following the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. And with every passing week, the case seems to shift further away from a simple missing person investigation and closer towards something far darker. Behind closed doors, federal investigators are reportedly treating the case with extreme seriousness. Not because of rumors, not because of internet speculation, but because of the evidence they allegedly found inside that Tucson home. And according to multiple sources close to the investigation, the scene itself may have told a story long before the public ever heard about the DNA. From the very beginning, authorities hinted that something inside the home immediately alarmed investigators. There were reports of damaged surveillance equipment, signs that cameras may have been tampered with, questions surrounding missing footage. And then came the revelation that biological evidence belonging to an unidentified person had allegedly been recovered from inside the residence. That instantly changed the tone of the entire case. Because stranger DNA inside a home is not automatically suspicious on its own, homes collect outside DNA constantly. Delivery drivers, repair workers, visitors, neighbors, all of them can unknowingly leave behind traces. But investigators don't usually spend months aggressively testing random DNA unless they believe it may actually matter. That's why the exact location of the evidence is becoming such a major focus. Experts following the case believe investigators are carefully reconstructing movement patterns inside the home. Every room, every surface, every fiber, every microscopic trace. They are likely trying to determine not just who may have entered the house, but what happened minute by minute during the critical window surrounding Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. And that process is painfully slow. Real investigations are nothing like television dramas. There is no detective dramatically solving the case in one conversation. Instead, forensic teams spend endless hours comparing timestamps, reviewing surveillance footage frame by frame, cross-checking cell phone data, and retesting evidence over and over again looking for inconsistencies. One tiny mistake can destroy an entire prosecution later in court. That's why the FBI's reported involvement in advanced forensic testing matters so much. According to legal analysts discussing the case, investigators may now be using modern genetic genealogy techniques capable of identifying unknown individuals through distant family DNA connections. This is the same kind of technology that has solved cold cases decades after crimes occurred. But the process is incredibly complex. First, scientists must generate a usable DNA profile. Then that profile has to be cleaned and verified to ensure there's no contamination. After that, analysts compare the genetic markers against public and law enforcement databases. If there's no direct match, genealogists begin building enormous family trees, sometimes tracing relatives back generations until they can narrow down a possible suspect. That process alone can take weeks or even months. And even then, identifying someone through genealogy is only the beginning. Investigators still need corroborating evidence. They need to place that person near the scene. They need timelines, surveillance footage, phone records, witnesses, digital activity, vehicles, purchases, travel history. DNA may open the door, but it rarely closes the case by itself. That's why authorities are reportedly collecting and reviewing such an enormous amount of data. Nancy Grace referenced thousands of hours of surveillance footage investigators are allegedly sorting through right now. Think about the scale of that operation for a moment. Cameras from businesses, traffic intersections, residential doorbells, highway systems, parking lots, gas stations, ATMs, private security systems. Every possible route in and out of the area has likely been examined repeatedly. And somewhere inside all that footage, investigators may believe the answer already exists. The public only sees fragments of this investigation, but behind the scenes, digital forensic teams are likely building a massive timeline covering every movement connected to the case. They are probably analyzing when devices entered or left the area, comparing vehicle patterns, studying repeated appearances, and mapping activity down to the minute. Modern investigations are built as much on technology as traditional detective work. That's also why Kash Patel's comments about the first 48 hours created so much attention. In missing person and suspected abduction cases, the earliest hours are often the most important. Memories are fresher. Digital records are easier to preserve. Surveillance footage hasn't been overwritten yet. Potential witnesses are easier to locate. Vehicles are still moving through predictable patterns. Delays can hurt everything. Patel's remarks strongly suggested that the FBI believed they could have moved faster had they been fully integrated earlier in the investigation. While he stopped short of directly blaming local authorities, his frustration was obvious. And that tension has become one of the most controversial parts of the entire case. Critics have increasingly questioned whether communication problems between agencies slowed the investigation during its most important stage. Reports about disputes involving evidence transfers and information sharing only intensified those concerns. Nancy Grace went even further, openly accusing local leadership of allowing ego and territorial battles to interfere with the case. Whether that criticism is fair or not, it highlights a larger reality that often exists in major investigations. Different agencies sometimes approach cases very differently. Local departments may prioritize controlling information tightly to protect leads. Federal agencies may push for broader coordination and access to specialized resources. Sometimes those approaches work together smoothly, sometimes they don't. But for the Guthrie family and everyone following the case, those disputes are frustrating because the central issue remains unchanged. Nancy Guthrie is still missing, and every day without answers increases the pressure on investigators. Meanwhile, public speculation continues to explode online. Social media has transformed modern investigations in ways law enforcement never had to deal with decades ago. Every rumor spreads instantly. Every vague statement becomes a theory. Every delay becomes suspicious. Amateur detectives dissect photographs, timelines, and interviews looking for hidden clues. Some online communities have become convinced the case involves a targeted abduction. Others believe someone known to the victim must be involved. Some focus on the alleged surveillance tampering. Others obsess over the unidentified DNA. But investigators have repeatedly warned the public against jumping to conclusions. And despite constant online theories, authorities have not publicly named a suspect. That silence frustrates many people, but investigators often stay quiet for a reason. Revealing too much too early can damage a case permanently. Suspects may destroy evidence, witnesses may alter statements, false confessions may emerge, potential juries may become contaminated by publicity. So investigators frequently hold back key details intentionally. That's why some experts believe there may be far more evidence in this case than the public realizes. For example, authorities have been extremely careful about describing the condition of the home itself. Certain details have never been fully explained publicly. Investigators have also remained vague about exactly how they determine the disappearance may involve foul play. That wording matters. Law enforcement agencies typically avoid publicly classifying a disappearance as suspicious unless there is evidence supporting that concern. Something at the scene clearly convinced investigators this was not a routine missing person situation. And once the FBI became involved, the scale of the investigation appeared to expand significantly. Federal resources allow access to advanced forensic capabilities, national databases, behavioral analysts, cyber investigators, and specialized recovery teams. Cases involving potential abductions or interstate activity often trigger broader coordination efforts. Still, even with all those resources, cases like this can become incredibly difficult, because sometimes the biggest problem investigators face is not lack of evidence, it's too much evidence. Think about everything investigators must eliminate before they can focus on the correct lead. Every unidentified vehicle, every cell phone signal, every fingerprint, every DNA sample, every person captured on surveillance footage, every tip submitted by the public. Thousands upon thousands of data points. Most turn out to be irrelevant, but somewhere inside that massive pile of information, investigators believe the truth exists, and increasingly, it appears they believe the DNA could be the key that unlocks everything else. That's why the laboratory testing process matters so much. Advanced forensic sequencing today is dramatically more powerful than what existed even a decade ago. Tiny degraded samples that once would have been useless can now sometimes produce extraordinary results. Scientists can isolate microscopic genetic material and generate profiles from evidence previously considered impossible to analyze. But those methods are expensive, time-consuming, and technically demanding. And because the stakes are so high, every result must be carefully verified before investigators move forward. If the sample ultimately identifies someone with no legitimate reason to have been inside Nancy Guthrie's home, the entire direction of the investigation could change overnight. At that point, detectives would begin reconstructing everything about that individual's life: employment, relationships, travel patterns, financial records, criminal history, internet searches, cell phone activity, vehicle movements, every detail. And if enough evidence aligns, investigators could finally begin building a prosecutable case. But there's another possibility investigators must also prepare for. What if the DNA doesn't identify anyone? That happens too. Not every sample is complete enough for analysis. Not every profile exists in databases. Some evidence degrades beyond recovery. Some genetic genealogy searches hit dead ends because family records are incomplete or relatives never submitted DNA to public databases. Investigators know that risk, which is why they are almost certainly pursuing multiple parallel strategies at once. Digital evidence, physical evidence, witness interviews, geographic analysis, behavioral profiling, financial tracking, vehicle analysis, communication records. Every investigative avenue is likely moving simultaneously behind the scenes. And through all of it, the emotional toll on the family continues to grow. Cases like this create a brutal kind of uncertainty that never truly allows people to breathe. Families live trapped between hope and fear every single day. Every phone call becomes terrifying. Every news update becomes emotionally exhausting. Every rumor online becomes another wound reopening. Meanwhile, public attention creates its own pressure. National media coverage can help generate tips and keep cases alive, but it also magnifies every controversy surrounding the investigation. Every disagreement between agencies becomes public drama. Every offhand comment gets analyzed endlessly. Sheriff Chris Nanos has faced particularly intense scrutiny after several public statements critics described as overly blunt or revealing. Supporters argue he is simply being transparent. Critics say too much public commentary can damage sensitive investigations. Either way, the spotlight on this case has become enormous, and the longer the mystery remains unsolved, the bigger that spotlight grows. What makes the case especially gripping to the public is the unsettling combination of modern technology and old-fashioned uncertainty. Despite cameras, digital tracking, DNA science, and advanced surveillance systems, investigators still do not have a complete picture of what happened. That reality unsettles people because it challenges the belief that technology can explain everything. Sometimes it can't. Sometimes investigators are left trying to reconstruct a crime almost entirely through fragments. A partial DNA sample, a blurry image, a missing timestamp, a cell phone ping, a suspicious vehicle. Tiny puzzle pieces scattered across thousands of hours of investigative work. And sometimes one overlooked detail changes everything. There have been countless major cases where investigators unknowingly possessed the critical clue from the very beginning, but didn't recognize its importance until much later. A license plate hidden in background footage, a timestamp discrepancy, a digital record that initially seemed meaningless. That possibility is likely driving investigators to repeatedly revisit evidence in this case. Because if Nancy Guthrie was abducted, whoever carried it out probably made mistakes. Most criminals do. They leave behind traces without realizing it. A fiber, a fingerprint, DNA, metadata, vehicle movement, device activity, purchase records. Modern forensic investigations are designed to uncover those hidden errors piece by piece, and according to experts, that process may already be happening right now. One particularly interesting aspect of the case involves the alleged use of cached digital data. Patel suggested investigators were able to recover material even though certain recording subscriptions reportedly were not active. That detail matters because many people incorrectly assume deleted or unrecorded digital information disappears forever. In reality, fragments of data can sometimes remain recoverable through servers, device memory, network logs, or cached systems. Digital forensics has become one of the most powerful tools in modern criminal investigations. Investigators can reconstruct movements, communications, timelines, and activity patterns from incredibly small traces of electronic evidence. Phones, smart home devices, vehicles, Wi-Fi connections, fitness trackers, and cloud systems all create data trails. And sometimes suspects don't even realize they're leaving those trails behind. That's why authorities likely moved aggressively to secure every digital device connected to the home and surrounding area. Even if direct footage of a suspect doesn't exist, indirect digital evidence can still become powerful. A vehicle appearing repeatedly across multiple camera systems, a cell phone entering the area unexpectedly, a device disconnecting suddenly, an unusual route taken late at night. Each tiny detail helps investigators narrow possibilities. Still, despite all the resources now involved, investigators face a painful reality. Time changes evidence. Memories fade. Surveillance systems overwrite footage. Witnesses move away. Physical evidence degrades. Digital records disappear. Leads grow colder. That's why cases like this often become races against time. But experienced investigators also know something else. Pressure changes people too. If someone is responsible for Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, investigators may believe that person is becoming increasingly nervous as the case expands. Public attention creates stress, FBI involvement creates fear, DNA testing creates panic, and people under pressure make mistakes. They talk too much, they change routines, they revisit locations, they search online obsessively. They contact people unexpectedly, they attempt to explain behavior nobody asked about. Investigators know how to watch for those changes, which is why many experts believe authorities are likely monitoring far more activity than the public realizes. In the meantime, public fascination with the case continues growing because the story touches on one of society's deepest fears: disappearing without answers. A person vanishing from their own home instantly creates a nightmare scenario people can imagine happening to themselves. It destroys the sense of safety people associate with home environments. And when investigators openly discuss stranger DNA, damaged cameras, and possible abduction indicators, that fear intensifies dramatically. That emotional impact is part of why this case has remained so heavily discussed after more than 100 days. But beyond the headlines and speculation, investigators remain focused on one objective: evidence. Not theories, not internet rumors, not television arguments, evidence. And right now, that evidence appears to center around one microscopic clue that investigators hope could finally identify whoever was inside Nancy Guthrie's home the night she vanished. One strand of DNA, one possible breakthrough, one chance to finally answer the question haunting this entire investigation: what really happened to Nancy Guthrie?